Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those in Europe. Welcome to the Data Discovery Sciences Dark Data Fracking webinar. This is Edward Peters from Data Discovery Scientists. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Nacho Lafuente, who will begin our broadcast. Nacho?
Hello, Edward. Thanks a lot. Yeah, and welcome to our first series of webinars on dark data fracking, a new and revolutionary method on unleashing the power of dark data. I'm Nacho Lafuente, founder and CEO of Datamize and the sponsors of today's webinar and co-presenter. Our presenter today is Dr. Edward Peters, founder and CEO of Data Discovery Sciences. Dr. Peters is an award-winning technology entrepreneur who works with organizations to create innovative data-intensive technologies. He has a PhD from the University of Amsterdam in Europe in applied economics, and he's a graduate of the Stanford University School of Business. He was the CEO of Data Direct Technologies, the leader, maybe some of you know this company, the leader of all DBC and JDBC driver technologies for mostly all the database in the world, as well as Open Connect, the early leader in operational intelligence based on dark data. Mr. Peters is the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2004 Maryland's Technology Council's Entrepreneur of the Year, a very prestigious award. He was also the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award finalist in 2 years in a row, 2003 and again in 2004 in Maryland region, and in 2010 he was honored same award in Dallas region. We have a relevant quote from Jim Signer. Jim is a former distinguished vice president at Gartner Research, probably a company you all know. Among other relevant facts, he highlights that Mr. Peters is one of the most dedicated persons he knows, and he knows a lot of people, believe me, in continued pursuit of advanced leverage of data and analytics as well. And also he highlights that Mr. Peter has been able to demonstrate success in several industries applying this approach and those concepts related to dark data. And without further interruption, let me hand over the presentation to Mr. Peter. Please, Edward.
Thank you, Nacho. And thank you all for joining. Now, have you thought about how much money is actually being spent today on the whole issue of data and analytics? If you do any research on this, what you'll see is the numbers sort of vary between somewhere in the $130 billion range to 170. That's the normal range you see of the amount of money we spend per year on data and analytics. Now, there's one estimate that's even a little higher than that. And this is a presentation that IBM gave to their investors, where what they say is that data is the new basis of competition. And we're spending, as of now, more than $1 trillion a year on all the connected objects and devices across the planet. And we're currently generating 2.5 billion gigabytes of data a day. And 80% is unstructured. And what's interesting is their number says that the worldwide data spend this year was $266 billion. And that's across big data, analytics, all those opportunities, and growing at 6% a year. Now, those of you with a little bit of math background know that a little number times a big number is a big number. So when you start multiplying 6% times 266 billion, it becomes large quite fast. And that's how much we're spending today. But the question is, what's the point of all this spending? And the Forrester Group talks about businesses today are focused on becoming insight-driven. And they call an insight-driven business something that harnesses and applies data and analytics at every opportunity to differentiate both product and customer experience. Now the key point here are the words every opportunity, because it's not just what we get from our transaction systems. It's not just what we get from our point of sale system. It's looking at every place that we touch the customer in depth. And we're looking at increasing our understanding at every interaction point. What does the customer understand? How are we treating them? How are we interacting with them? What are they actually looking for when they come to view our product or our service? How is that evolving over time? How are we getting that information? And really, what do we do with it when we have it? That's about being insight driven and understanding both all these processes in depth. And successful insight driven organizations are ones that really know more about their customers and processes than other people in their market, because that's the key of having data and having database competition, is that it's really not about the data. It's about the insights that you get from the data. And that's not something that a lot of people will really focus on, but it's getting insights from all that spend and all those data you collect. And what you're really focused on here is knowing more than your competition. And that means establishing a knowledge gap to give you a competitive edge. And that knowledge gap is about you collecting all the data, driving into all of the interactions, and understanding more about what your customers' wants and needs are and what they feel about your products and how they interact with your products and services, and you being able to then exploit that. And if you could create a knowledge gap, that allows you to do something very significant, and that's create a situation of information asymmetry. Now, when we were in school, in our economics classes, they taught us just how bad information asymmetry was. And economists look at this from a position of one party knowing more than the other, and then being able to have adverse advantage, meaning one side knowing more than the other, it can actually manipulate the other side. Now, that's true if we're looking to buy an automobile or buy a stock, whereby everybody needs to have the same information. Otherwise, somebody has an unfair advantage, and there's untold lawsuits on Wall Street all the time about these things. But in the case of business, normally understanding how to service and sell to your customer, that issue of information asymmetry is a good thing, because that allows you to do a better job than your competition, and that then sets you up for a second opportunity. And that second opportunity is called decision agility. Decision agility is about understanding an opportunity or a potential threat in the market, being able to change, adapt, and execute on what you learned faster than your competition, and do that before the window of opportunity closes. And some of you may be aware of what's called OODA, or the Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, or otherwise known as Boyd Loop. And this was developed by fighter pilots who were trying to understand what drove that type of decision making in aerial combat. And what they talked about is that those who could move faster through this type of cognitive cycle than their competitors actually were able to outperform them. And in that world of aviation, if you're inside of your opponent's OODA loop, that equals success. If you're slower than your opponent in their world, that equals death. And that's a bad thing. Now think about that in business. If an opportunity arises and you're able to understand and fill that niche faster than your competition, which today we commonly call pivot, that means you're going to have a lot more success. These aren't just academic terms or things that we want to do because we think they're good, but because Forrester here says that the payoff for all of this is that by 2020, insight-driven businesses are expected to outperform their competition, and that's by $1.4 trillion. Now, that is less than 2 years away. That $1.4 trillion is going to be available to those organizations that, one, spend the time on collecting the data, using that data to drive insights, and then creating knowledge gaps that lead them to asymmetrical information situations that then allow them to move faster with decision agility and take advantage. 1.47 trillion is a huge reason that you want to get on top of this curve and start to claim some of that for your organization. Now, one problem, 52% of all the data are dark. What that means is those data are unavailable to you or readily unavailable to you for insight generation. So think about all the money that's being spent, and yet only 15% of the data that are used to generate those insights, right? And the rest of it is either redundant or obsolete, and the other part is dark. So 52% of that data you don't have access to for insight generation. For the most part, you're working strictly on 15% of the clean data and trying to pick over that. Think about it for a second. That's really not a winning strategy, because the real opportunity lies in your ability to get at that 52% of the data that probably your competition can't get right now, and taking the time to increase your overall capacity for both collecting data and being able to get that into your insight generation process. And these dark data are those that exist both inside and outside your organization that are being collected, but you can't readily access them. It's like they're on the dark side of the moon. Overall, we're talking about 44 trillion terabytes of data by 2020, and 29 trillion terabytes of that data are dark, not being accessed because they're not readily available. So all the bases of competition and insight generation is going on around that 15%. Now, what do you think? Do you think that you'll be able to actually do more if you could access some of that dark data? Would that generate more insights for you? Oh, and by the way, on the bottom of your screen is a chat capability. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation, just put them in the chat window and we'll be able to answer them either as we go along or at the end. Most dark data exists in closed and proprietary formats. Wi-Fi, machines, networks, GPS systems. They're in system logs, transaction logs, unstructured transactions, in some cases, even in people. And what we show on the slide here, a lot of it's temporary data, proprietary and closed dark data that you need to find a way to access and extract. And once you have that, right, you can drive that into your overall process in an integration fashion for what your analytical uses, where you're storing it, all these different pieces. But it's getting at that 52%. That's the issue here. Traditionally, the way we look at this is on the left. You know, we understand what our reporting systems are. We know how to extract the data, you know, from SAP, from Oracle. And there's ways our business intelligence systems can readily, you know, pull that data. And that's called, in drilling terms, the jelly donut. You know, it's rather easy. You just punch down in, you pull out the data. You might have a lot of it, you might have to mine it, but frankly, you know how to get it, and it's not that hard. That's the 15% that really we're working with today. Now, on the right, we're talking about the data fracking process, because here, you know, we have no environmental concerns here like you might have in the oil world. But what we're talking about is being able to drill down into those unconventional sources and the ones that are frankly dark. So the tiramisu on the right is really the 52% we're talking about that exists in machines, routers, Wi-Fi, streaming data, text, all those things you can't get your hands on easily. The traditional approach, the jelly donuts, they focus on what we think of as known information. One company with 1,500 employees had 2.75 million spreadsheets. That's a lot of cells of data and a lot to try to go after, but we know where that is. We also talk about multiple versions of old documents, email attachments, inactive databases. Those are known sources. Those are known deposits of data that we can go get. Maybe it's a little more effort than just pulling it out of our ERP systems, but we know where it is, and it's not really that difficult. It's just tedious. Dark data fracking focuses on something different. We're focused on unknown data that's locked in those closed and proprietary environments. So here, we want to really think about process data about what's actually occurring, not just what your transaction system's reporting. There's lots of data that are locked inside of those actual transactions or the streaming transactions that we can't get. Streaming data that we can't readily see. Website data that really show you what the actual intent of why the customer came to visit your website. So you can see what the true demand was for what they might have wanted to do or what they came to do but couldn't because you didn't have that offer. So they either looked at something else or they went to somebody else's website. Location data that looks about the unknown movement of people and goods. Really amazing what you see when you can track that information and understand just how things move and why they take so much time, or why the whole process takes so much time because of inefficient and redundant effort. And lastly, event data regarding the status of machines and devices could give you opportunities for early maintenance and other types of opportunities that tell you just the status of the machine and how it's actually working in the overall process. None of this is available because it's really unknown. Here, we're going to look at how we learned about this, because the power of insight generation is really from unlocking data from what's called the unknown knowns and unknown unknowns. And Donald Rumsfeld made famous, of course, there are known knowns, so there's things we know. That's on the left-hand side, that jelly donut, and the 15%. And there are unknown knowns. That is to say, things that we know we don't know. And there are also things we don't know that we don't know. And those are the areas that we want to really figure out how we're going to address those data. That's the 52% that gives us that unique capability to generate insight. The data fracking process then is really most effectively used and targeted for how to feed analytical engines that are really consumption engines that we can feed more data and better data to for decision making. Now, this chart shows some of the different analytical technologies that we deploy in our organizations to focus on different parts of this structure. The red arrows indicate where dark data fracking has the most impact. So as you can see, when we look at what are the known unknowns, such as we use analytics, data mining, text mining, forecasting, unknown unknowns, these are areas where once we have the data, we might feed some AI or machine learning engines. We use it for understanding knowledge discovery once we actually break those data out and structure them into some format where we can then start to explore what we've actually found. So dark data fracking really isn't for the known knowns. The left side of the jelly donuts, we're popping data, statistics, wikis, news, we know all about that. It's really on the other three quadrants and mostly on the right-hand side. We're focused because that's where the real deposits are that we aren't getting. And that unlocks the insights we really need to be competitive and no more than your competition. So the data fracking, or the dark data fracking method, is a series of 4 steps. Discover, collect, integrate, and deploy, so you can work with the dark data that exists and really have it support your insight generation, because that's the key to success. And we want to go at this in a detailed way. And each step along the process has a set of techniques and tools that map to it that all work in harmony to provide an enhanced insight environment for you as you go forward. So let's talk about each one of these in some detail. The discover process looks at, first of all, what it is we're going to study for insight generation. Now, as business intelligence analysts and data scientists, the first thing we want to understand is, what problem are we trying to solve? It doesn't do us any good to just go and see what we can find and hope that there's some kind of pony in there somewhere. Well, we need to understand the scope of interrogation. What are we looking at? Where are we going? And what specifically do we want to generate more insights about? Then we need to describe how the newly learned insights will be a specific value. Why are we doing this? What do we expect to get out of it? We need to then inventory all possible sources of dark data that we might have that could support that process. What is the interaction? If it's a customer journey, how do we touch? Where do they come? How do they see our information? And lastly, we want to model that data so we can understand what it looks like, and that'll set us up for the next phase in the process. Now, discover, when we talk about our specific process for insight generation, again, customer journey, actual demand, process improvement, what problem are we trying to solve? What we're doing here is generating a hypothesis for you data scientists on the call. We need to really think about what is the problem we're looking at and what's our hypothesis as to what is it we're going to study and hopefully find those new insights that help us there. So what metrics are we currently using on the process? Do we know how much value is currently leaking out of the process? In other words, if it should be generating X, what is it generating today? Who's involved? What are the actors and why are the insights so critical? This is important so that we know once we go and collect the data, we can determine fairly quickly, are we actually solving the problem we came to solve? Are the insights that we're going to be generating in the right area to tell us that, this is good, we should continue forward with this. This is what we need to do as good data scientists to be able to really prove that it's solving the problem. Once we've done that, again, we're going to inventory every place we could find the dark data. Machines, networks, devices, people. Where are those points? Where are the points we're not thinking about? What are we collecting today? What could we be collecting? How is that going to increase our overall scope of interrogation? And then we want to understand what type of data we're going to have here in these deposits. Is it text? Is it streaming event data? Are there images? How does all that work together now to solve the problem that we started with so that we can move on then to the next step, which is collecting that data? Because once we've determined what it's going to look like and what that means and what it's worth and how it's going to help us generate insights, now we want to determine what methods we need to get it. We need to find or develop those connectors, extract it, and then structure it into some consumable event whereby we can add it into our processes. For collect, easily enough, we want to determine for each machine and device, what's the access protocol? Is it an open protocol we can use, some open standard, like ODBC, XML, XQuery, or is it something proprietary that we're going to have to develop to crack that protocol so we can pull that data out from that machine or device? Once we've figured that, we have our process and we start to extract the data. And there we're thinking, what type of data is this now? How are we going to do this? Is it time series data? Are we looking at matching URL stems? Is it content? Is it tagging? All the normal data things that we have to think about to make the raw attributes useful, because we want to structure them based upon the activities into some level of event and define the scope of those events, time sequences, clicks, pages. How does this all work together? We want to include descriptors as far as attributes in XML documents. We want to think about the attributes of each process event, the timing, the source, destination. How does all that work? And ensure that, whatever process we come up with, and then in the same session, we can inherit attributes to make this really useful, and that we can move on to what we came for, which is now that we've discovered the data, we've collected it, we started to structure it into some type of format that we can actually now integrate it, within our environment and deploy it, so we can start actually generating those types of insights. Now, at this point, let me turn the presentation back to Nacho Lafuente of DataMind.
Thank you, Edward. So the next phase is integrate. This phase revolves around 4 different topics that you see in the screen, which are some level of aggregation that is needed for those events being created. The determination of the information sinks, where you need to integrate those events to the coordination with existing governance and EDL methods, and finally making those new assets of information persistent or copy those into your organization. Let's go through each one of those. First one is event aggregation. What we have found dealing with dark data across our journey is that big data platform require a high investment. Dark data is not only about big data. There are some occasions in which the value you extract from dark data in terms of volume is something you could store in your laptop. So there is no one-one symmetry between big data and dark data. There are some dark data that are huge in amount, in terms of volume or speed, but it's not always like that. But it comes to the fact that at certain occasions, you need to aggregate things because volume is not equivalent to value. We have worked together with customers in situations in which the real value comes from collecting all the fine degree of detail from their dark data we are looking into, but aggregating those into 5-minute windows. And the final events you are integrating into the existing data warehouse is that aggregated event. So it makes a lot of sense and it needs to be kept in mind. Next one is you need to determine the information sync. So once those relevant events have been collected or aggregated if needed, they need to be transmitted somewhere else. What it means? It means that the sinks, the destinations, usually are some kind of corporate storage or analytical platform. You need to elaborate a detailed list on that. There might be multiple destinations, different companies, different departments within your company, but also you need to keep in mind that different architecture should be supported. It could be on premises, it could be in cloud, it could be a hybrid. You might have different vendors, platforms like Teradata, Oracle, Amazon Go, whatever. At this point, what you need to keep in mind is that this step is about squeezing all the potential and all the investments you have done so far in all your platforms regarding storage, analytical tools, and all the rest. Then, as we have been transforming something that used to be dark and hidden and you could not easily grab your hands on that, but we have made it quite a standard in terms of creating a standard information, a standard events. So what happens at this point is that you are like a normal citizen, if you will. So you need to stick to the existing methods within the company. We have just identified a couple of them, which are usually very important, like the data governance and the EDL methods that rule your company. So now your DAR data is a standard data. You need to stick to those methods. And this is a very good way of making those new assets first-class citizen in a way that those new collect data are being made available at the corporate or department level into your company. Then, this is the last step of this phase, integrate. This is the natural ending of this. Once you have made something, you have pop up something that used to be hidden, you need to make it persistent because it could be persist somewhere that is not easily accessible in a distributed way, not reachable, or it could be temporary and disappear after a while. Anyway, at the end of the day, what you need to do here is to make it persistent, make it super standard, along to other data that exist in your company. So it needs to be persistent in your corporate storage platform, and maybe not just one location, but maybe multiple locations in multiple formats using different semantics. So you could be storing a complete copy of that dark data events in a big data platform, while in an existing data warehouse, you could be just storing an aggregated event. That usually makes a lot of sense. Then we go into the deploy phase, which is the fourth and last part of these methods, in which you need to construct or rank analytical models. We have all heard about analytical model, different like descriptive. Then you need to visualize and interact with dashboard and reports. Probably this is the step in which most people in the BI area feel most comfortable with, because there has been technology market for a lot of years. You need to get into insights, and insights leading to conclusion. And the last step is quite innovative. You need to look back into the whole method, because although we are representing here a left to right hand sides flow, in reality, this is a circle and it needs to look back. So let's go into detail of each one. Analytical models. So most data scientists feel very comfortable here. There are different analytical models in the company. You can have the scripting models that consider the past and certain amount of present, if you will. So depending on whether you are going into a real-time approach or more about approach, you will have different amounts of present in that information. But for sure, you will have all the past, all the history. Predictive models are more about the future. So you are using current information to try to predict what will happen in the future. Once those models are built, and there is a lot of science and technology here to deal with that, eventually you need to evaluate or rank your model. A descriptive model usually is refreshed with more data. That usually happens in your data warehouse when you are more data and you need to refresh that model. In a predictive model, you usually rank or score, presents the fresh new data to that model so that an outcome is created, and that outcome itself can be also the result of the data gathering that is being done, and again by itself it's a new event that you can consider as well. Then we go into the visualization and interaction. Your data warehouse or your data lake is now fulfilled with not only the data you used to know, like transactional data or maybe some master data, but also the new dark data that you have pulled together from different locations. You have gone through the analytical models. Maybe you have created new data with different kinds of refinement and aggregation. And then it's time to visualize and understand those through dashboards, through reports with all the level of sophistication, like drill down, or maybe you've got applications that pull those data, like corporate applications that consume the new data. Here you've got humans that are interacting with this system and also third-party system. So the overall goal of this step is to understand the present or the future by looking into those data, asking for more detail, or maybe reporting for internal compliance. Okay, so at this step, you have enough data and tools and knowledge as to create insights. Only data-driven companies are aware about using data for that operational performance increase and to ultimately gain competitive advantages. And that, believe me, only happens by carefully understanding what the data is explaining to you. You need to understand the data. It is clear that analytical models and visualization tools, different techniques, help humans and other applications on this task. But at the end, some insights are needed to improve your business and the models themselves. So once you've got the insights, which is like sort of understanding you have of data, that put together and clearly analyzed leads to conclusions. And those conclusions might eventually change the way you do your business. And that's the overall goal, is to provide you with those promised competitive advantages to your business. Which leads me to the very last step of this part of the method, which is look back. If you get an insight or a conclusion, a part of your data-driven company, but you don't feedback that into the company and the rest of this process and departments and stakeholders here, this is useless. Because every insight and conclusion must be redirected into the company. Why? Because eventually your models will be refined, because your visualizations are to be improved, because new integration, and you see that we are touching points at each part of the process, new integrations will be suggested, and potentially you will need to add new data sources to be collected, and you will drill down into new places to discover new data. So look back. And it's really important because it closes the circle. So now let's go into a concrete example. This customer, Globelia. Globelia is the leading Spanish travel wholesaler. They had a problem with one of the main systems dealing with hotels, flights, cars, and some of the products they sell offer through different channels. They understood very well what was sold because that was stalled for years. They understood extremely well that, but what happens in this sector is that you need to make a lot of availability requests, if you will, to convert into a sale. And they were not able to understand that so well. So by carefully looking into that, by understanding those temporary data, because once you ask something to an information system and you get a request, usually what happens is that that interaction is temporary. So you might have a record that the hit was done, but you don't usually keep the full record because of the volume and the mission critical system that is behind. So if you are able to grab your hands on all those dark data and you extract the really valuable information out of that, you can start answering very interesting questions like, tell me the destinations where I am replying that I have no product, either because it's not in my portfolio or because there is a configuration error in my system or because it is exhaust in my inventory. So by carefully doing this and following the method, Globalia was able to increase their revenue in the wholesale division between 3 and 5%. And this is amazing because it's based on data that was at their hands, but it was dark. Another good example comes from a company based in the United States delivering toxicology analytics for animals. They have deployed a new state-of-the-art machine called Zero Farm, which is a medium-aim machine aimed at big farms using a new business model, which is pay as you go. Basically, they give them away the machine for free, and then they start billing for the real consumption, and they can do amazing things like in just-in-time supplies delivery. So what's the secret sauce here? Those machines from different vendors are not really prepared to do so because they're not designed to publish right away all their internal data about what's the consumption of different reagents, what kind of analytics have you done, how much do they need to bill you. So the magic here comes if you're able to grab your hands on those close and proprietary data, frac them all, put in a standard format, and put them together in a platform that belongs to several clinics. They can start doing amazing things like providing a very easy web interface, providing artificial intelligence to anticipate to what the customers are doing. And as you see in the bottom part, you can monthly invoice those guys for exactly what they have done or just-in-time delivery. And finally, we have another case from the very well-known French stationery corporation, BIC. In this case, the dark data comes from the fact that they sell across little shops like pens and so on. And it's not so easy for them to gather all the selling data from those little shops because obviously first, the data do not belong to them, and second, it's sparse across a country or the whole world. So in this case, the dark data is a store, but it's a store in different format, multiple locations. They have been able to collect some of that knowledge from different stationery shops, put that together in a platform, in a common format, and then have done a really great job on understanding the real way that sales are going, the performance of marketing campaigns, and they're improving dramatically their business by analyzing those previously dark data.
Thank you, Nacho. Those were fantastic customer case studies where people are going to focus on getting the dark data and being able to use it to drive insights that are making a lot of money for their businesses. So let's just recap a little bit about what we learned so far. Is that one, organizations are becoming insight driven. And to be insight driven, they need to be both more focused on driving that type of dark data into their environment, and they need to rely on creating knowledge gaps and information asymmetry so they could actually make decisions faster than their competition and exploit those opportunity windows through decision agility. Now, those organizations that can do that are able to outperform their competition and claim some of that $1.7 trillion that are available over the next 2 years. Now, 52% of the data, though, as we talked about, are dark and not readily available as they exist in the devices, machines, and networks that Nacho just talked about in his case studies, where people are actually finding ways to discover, collect, and then integrate and deploy that information for real opportunities here to grab some of that 1.7 trillion. So we discussed dark data fracking at the highest levels here in the method for discovering those deposits, collecting the data, and then deploying them through your environment. Using that process is the key to unlocking that data and generating those insights that are helping the case study people that you've seen, those organizations, to really outsell, outservice, and outperform their competition because they know more and have more data sources that they've placed into their environment. And those case studies are showing you how people are doing this today to get real value. We've been talking about this now for just about 50 minutes. And as you can see, we've just scratched the surface. Now, would you like to learn more about this? I mean, really understand in more detail how you could use this, how you could successfully implement a project like this in your organization? I mean, I would. I mean, that's exactly what I would want to do. I'd want to grab this now. I'd want to use those steps, find that data, and find a way to do it in my organization. And I'm sure some of you listening here are thinking that's exactly what I'm going to do, and you're going to try to do that, and hopefully you'll be successful and make that happen. But imagine if there was a group of people you could work with that would have the same issues you have of trying to understand how to find dark data and leverage it in their environment so they could be part of that insight generation leadership group that starts to move their organizations toward capturing some of that 1.7 trillion. I mean, would that be something you'd be interested in doing, in joining with a group like that, that were actually focused on learning this in depth and starting to generate that in your organization and have a group of people you can actually work with on an ongoing basis? And if you are, what I'm glad to introduce to you today is something we're offering right now called the Dark Data Fracking Consortium. And this is where you can learn more about this and actually get your hands on it through a series of 3 two-day mastermind style meetings to explore the method in depth. This is where we're going to focus on developing the next generation of data-driven insight leader. And organizations that have done this, as you've seen in the case studies, have either discovered or saved millions of dollars by implementing this type of approach. Now, the first session we're going to offer here is next month in December. And we're going to focus on the first 2 pieces of the process, first 2 steps, discover and collect. And we're going to explore those in depth and teach you every step and more than you've seen on, in our brief introduction here, and how to go through this and put together a group for feedback and individual coaching for each member or team that joins the session. Additionally, we've invited some leading industry luminaries and people from the academic world to join us and be part of this. And so you could expect to have a presentation from one of them at each session. The second session of the 3 will be in March, where we're going to focus on the second and the group of process steps, the 3rd and 4th step, which are integrate and deploy. And this is where, once you've had some time to work on the data, understand where it is and collect it, this will focus on all the steps that Nacho talked about and how you integrate that data, how you deploy it to your data lakes, how you put it in a place where you can actually now make it more widely available to your analytical processes. So same type of format, we're going to focus on the same issues, and we're going to invite presentations from leading academics or industry experts to join us and work with us on these steps. And frankly, they'll be working with you directly to help you complete the process and really both accelerating the process for you and de-risking it. Because as you know, these processes and steps take time to implement. And we're talking about doing it within a 9-month period in a compressed period to increase your learning potential. Now, the 3rd session will go over all 4 steps, and we'll use this to talk about what progress that you've had to date and try to remove any barriers for success so that you can now fully implement this and have something working that's delivering those insights, for you and for your organization. Now, the sessions are going to be held, all of them in Barcelona, on the dates that we mentioned. So it's an interesting thing. Now, normally membership in this type of a group costs somewhere between 25,000 euros to 100,000 a year. And if you've kept your eye on any mastermind events, you'll see that this is pretty typical. 25,000 is usually the minimum to get in. And then depending upon the type of member and the exclusivity, it can go to 100,000 and beyond. The cost of the Dark Data Fracking Consortium in Europe that we're talking about is 10,000 euros a year. That's the price that we're going to set for the inaugural series of 3 events. But for you who are webinar attendees, we're going to offer this to you at 5,997. So 5,997 euros per year will get you membership to those 3 sessions. And this price is only available to you as webinar attendees, but you need to apply within the next 4 days because we want to get this organized for the 14th of December. So we want you to apply if you're interested, and will only be able to offer this price for that period of time. Now, here's what you get. Not only will you be involved in the 3 two-day mastermind sessions that we talked about and have access to the industry experts, but we know that some people and companies like to have teams come. So if you want to bring a second member to the session, we'll do it at half price. Secondly, we're going to include the use of data mice tools for your pilot projects that you develop through the use of the consortium and what you learn in the consortium for a year for free. So no, you want to pay for tools. And as we go along, there may even be other tools that are added to this process. Third, every attendee or team will have a 1-hour phone coaching or consulting session each month where Nacho and I and members of our teams will get on the phone with you, talk about how you're doing, what you've learned, and what it is we could do to help you move along the process. And lastly, I've decided that what would be really useful would be to have a group specific, so those members of the consortium can have an online dark data fracking community where we could all exchange ideas and thoughts, and probably once a week, one of us or both of us will be on the actual community live so we can answer questions and work with each other. Now, all of that is what's being offered for that $5,997 membership. And that's something you're not going to see most places. But here's one thing you need to be aware of. There are only 10 memberships available for this consortium. As you could guess, we couldn't give the amount of attention we need to if we had 50 people. And 4 organizations have already decided they want to be involved with this even before the webinar was offered. So 4 seats are already taken, which means there's 6 slots available. And we'll close the registration for this after those 6 seats are filled. So it's very important that you, if you're interested, register by Monday close of business in Europe. So that's 6 p.m. noon Central European time on the 20th of November. Now, the application process, you see the click here to apply button, will be live in the replay room after this session. And you'll receive an email invitation to the replay room, probably within the next few hours. So after you apply, you'll be contacted by email to arrange a time to speak with someone from Data Discovery Sciences, most likely as well Datamine. And from there, we will review the process. If you're accepted, we will send you an email describing the registration payment and all the details. But remember, there's only 6 memberships that are left. So if you're interested, you'll need to focus on applying before the closing date. Thank you for being on the call. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat room. I see there's some here.
Edward, I think there is one question on the chat.
Go ahead.
The question is, why are temporary transactions dark data if most of those transactions or interactions come through my own systems? So this is a very usual question. And the answer is within your own IT systems. So what happens is that your systems cope with activity like transactions that it's like an order or a sale or whatever, and that needs to be persisted in order to be confirmed because you have all your legal, logistics, etc. over that. But before that happens, many companies go through the very standard sales funnel in which you need to do a lot of activity on the top to really convert and sell something, product, service to your customer. So what happens is that all the activity at the top part of the funnel is temporal. There is so much volume, customers calling to a call center or customers getting information on your product or your price through your APIs, that it's so much in volume that your systems hardly ever cope with that load. So you cannot ask those systems to keep a complete copy of everything that is going on. So when we mean that temporary transactions like those, availability inquiry, inventory check, all those transactions are temporal, is because once the result is given back to the requester, usually you just keep, in the best case, a very little amount of information on that, like the timestamp and just very few information, and most of the times for auditing and security purposes, but not for business purposes and analytical purposes. So when we mean dark data, it means that if you are able to extract the whole semantics and the value of that interaction, the full request, the full response, the conditions around that contains a lot of value. That's why it's classified as dark data.
There's another question here that says, I already have Google Analytics. Why isn't that enough when I'm looking at my website? Nacho, you want to address that because it's relevant to one of the case studies that you mentioned?
Yeah, so that is another usual case we get to. Dark data, it's about knowing what's going on in your company. So Google Analytics, it's very spread out across the world in many customers. It's the #1 analytical tool for web channels. That means a website or a web page, if you want. So what happens is that complex companies and complex businesses nowadays do not only operate on just one channel. They just not sell anymore through the e-commerce. They might have call center or maybe a physical office or your mobile applications or some internal applications for your agents or even a B2B API. So when there is additional complexity, it happens that the same product is being distributed, marketed, and sold over multiple channels. You might understand what's going on using Google Analytics on the web channel, which is just one of your channels. But most companies are still missing all the other channels. So that's why we always say that there is more things beyond Google Analytics.
Another question here that refers to the whole issue of process data. So the question is, I already understand data about my processes. I have it, in my transaction systems. What is it that I'm not seeing? Well, let me answer that one quickly. What we've learned is that processes in general tend to just show things that happen at the major, if you will, transaction points of events. They don't look at what happens between the events. They're not aware of how the data's changed from event to event, what's actually happened, how long those events have taken, and what steps are really missing from what they're seeing. And by capturing all that information, we start to see all the data about the event and increase the value of the overall analytical process. This is why a lot of healthcare companies use this type of information now to really increase their key metrics, such as operational first-time pass rate, which means, why didn't it go through the system, my claim, the first time without failing? What made it fail, and then what do people do to fix it? Well, they know that it had to be fixed, and that at the end of the event, whatever needed to be fixed was done, but they have no view on how many types of processes happened between when it dropped into that pending situation and when it was actually fixed. Secondly, by being aware of the stream data, you can find all types of things about how long those things are actually happening and what's the periodicity between actual event transactions. For instance, one healthcare company who was outsourcing understood that basically they were being taken advantage of by their business process outsourcer. And in this case, they had a series of claims that were basically being touched more than 4 times. And if they were reimbursed at a higher category. And what the dark data fracking process showed them was that there were microseconds between touches, meaning no work was being done, simply clicks that were driving it into the next category. And that saved that company tens of millions of dollars in that process. Now, one more question here I see is about tools. There's a question about, we discussed earlier that tools exist at every step in the process, and indeed they do. There wasn't time in this presentation window to actually have a tool matrix that addressed that, but there are tools at every step in the way. Obviously, Datamize helps you collect and extract the data through its collection processes and then stage it for integration and deployment. There are other tools, as you know, there's many tools that exist in the deployment stage, whether they're data lakes, whether they're visualization tools, like MicroStrategy or Tableau, all those types of things you can use, as well as in the early phases for data exploration, there are tools like Claridia Tech, which lets you actually, once you have the data, explore it and see what it's useful for. So there's a whole range of that. And as part of the consortium, you can understand that we will go into this in detail and discuss a lot of different tools that you could use and how they all work together. Other questions before the end of the program? No? Well, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Nacho, for sponsoring this presentation.
My pleasure, Edward. Thanks to you for this awesome explanation on our data and the methods. I think it's a very revolutionary approach dealing with this kind of data, and we hope to hear back from you very soon. You got a detailed explanation from Dr. Peters on the process and also on the consortium that we are putting together. Datomize is the proud first sponsor of this consortium, adding their technology on top of the bonuses that you have been explained. I think we can deliver a lot of value on that. So that's why I especially thank you for attending the webinar and hope to hear back from you soon.
People, look out for your invitation to the replay room. You should see that shortly. Thank you, Nacho. Thank you, everybody, for attending.